Welcome to immunology. In this talk, we're going to look at some basic concepts in immunology, and we're going to focus on the different agents that can attack our body. By the end of this talk, students should be able to name different types of pathogens and be able to identify the pathogens based on their description. We are going to learn about characteristics of different classes of pathogens also. Pathogens are organisms that can cause harm by reproducing on or inside a host. So pathogens can cause diseases which we know as infectious diseases. Now, most pathogens are microorganisms, but it should be remembered that even though most pathogens are microorganisms, not all microorganisms are pathogenic. For example, we do have a lot of diseases that are caused by bacteria. But when we look at how many bacteria are pathogenic and how many are non-pathogenic, only about 5% of bacteria are pathogenic. Here we can look at a map of the world and all the different diseases that are there. And so we can see that almost every part of the world is affected by pathogens. Thus, infectious diseases are widespread throughout this world. Now, approximately 50% of health problems can be attributed to infectious diseases. Sometimes infectious diseases can result in secondary complications. And so we do have to spend a lot of resources in preventing and treating all these different health problems that are caused due to infectious diseases. Now, a lot of times pathogens are able to cause these infectious diseases because they have found ways to overcome the host body's defenses. Before we look at how a pathogen is able to overcome the host body's defenses, let us look at different types of pathogens. There are different types of pathogens, and these pathogens can belong to different classes of organisms. So the first one we're going to look at are viruses. These are the smallest pathogens. However, it should be remembered that viruses are considered non-living. So even though they are non-living, they have the ability to infect a host, and hence they're considered as pathogens. Another class of pathogens are bacteria. These are unicellular prokaryotic organisms that can cause a wide variety of infectious diseases. Fungi are eukaryotic organisms, and there are some fungi that can also cause infectious diseases. We do have some protozoans and protists that can cause diseases, and hence some of them are also pathogenic in nature. Helminths are basically nematode worms, and they are among the largest pathogens that can cause infectious diseases. Now, based on the ability to infect a host, pathogens can be divided into two main groups. These are the primary or the obligate pathogens that will always cause a disease in the host. So whenever they come in contact with the host, they never try to coexist but cause an infectious disease. The other category are the opportunistic pathogens, which a lot of times try to coexist with the host. However, under certain conditions and circumstances, these organisms that are coexisting with the host can actually cause diseases, and hence they wait for the opportunity in order to become a pathogen. Viruses are obligate intracellular parasites, and they're considered as non-living particles, but because they have the ability to infect a host and cause an illness, they are considered as pathogens. Viruses are inert and come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and we can see some of these shapes and sizes in the figure that's shown here. When they do come in contact with the appropriate host, that is when they become more active. Some terminology that you should be familiar with is a virion. A virion is a single mature infective viral particle. Now, when we look at the composition of viruses, all viruses normally will have an outer protein coat, and the protein coat will cover the nucleic acid that is on the inside. Let us now look at the composition of a virus in a little more depth. So as we talked about, on the outer side, the viruses have a capsid, which is made up of protein. Now this capsid is made up of these identical repeating protein subunits, which are called capsomeres. Since they are identical repeating subunits, capsomeres provide structural symmetry to the virus. Now this capsid encloses the nucleic acid of the virus. Now, depending on what kind of virus it is, the nucleic acid could be either DNA or RNA, and it could be double or single-stranded. Thus, different viruses have different types of nucleic acids. Some viruses will have an envelope that surrounds the capsid. So an enveloped virus, the outermost part will be this envelope. Now the envelope is normally made of a phospholipid bilayer that has proteins embedded in it. Now how does this virus make this envelope, or where does it get it from? Does it make it on its own? And the answer is no, it doesn't. It actually obtains it from the host that it has infected. So once it infects the host and the host makes the many different virions, when they leave the host, they basically take a portion of the host phospholipid bilayer. And that's how they get the envelope. Now, what we should remember is that host cells can recognize different parts of a virus to alert the immune system of a viral infection. That is when the body will try to start fighting off this virus. Bacteria are single-cell microorganisms that come under the prokaryotes group. Now, prokaryotes do not have membrane-bound organelles, and so bacteria also don't have any membrane-bound organelles like the endoplasmic reticulum or the Golgi. Bacteria are found everywhere, so every part of Earth has bacteria. Most of them are non-pathogenic. In fact, when we look at our body, we have a slew of bacteria present in all parts of our body, and in many cases they actually are helpful to us. This is basically the microbiome. Bacteria are also used commercially to make different types of foods. So here's an example of some fermented foods where bacteria play a really important role. So thus, a lot of them are non-pathogenic. Bacteria come in different shapes and sizes. For example, you can have spherical bacteria, and these spherical bacteria they're called as coccus, and they can form these different arrangements that result in different names for these bacteria, like Diplococcus or tetrad. In addition to a spherical shape, we can have other shapes that are shown here, like the rod-shaped bacillus, or a shape that is between a sphere and a rod, which is the Coccobacillus. You can have comma-shaped bacteria, which are the Vibrio, and spiral-shaped bacteria like the Spirillum or Spirochetes. Now let us look at the composition of bacteria. When we look at the structure of bacteria, let's start from the outside. So in the case of some bacteria, not all, the outermost part is the capsule. Underneath the capsule is the cell wall. Now in many bacteria, the cell wall has a component called as peptidoglycan, but it has other components too. Underneath the cell wall is the cell membrane. Now the cell membrane has the plasma membrane, which is a phospholipid bilayer, and inside the cell we have a nucleoid that consists of the chromosomal DNA. Now all bacteria are going to have DNA as their genetic material, unlike viruses that could have DNA or RNA as their genetic material. Now sometimes we do have extra chromosomal DNA that is not shown in this figure, and this extra chromosomal DNA is also called as a plasmid, which is not required for survival but could encode for certain components that helps the bacteria be pathogenic. Some bacteria have a tail-shaped structure called as a flagellum. They can have more than one flagellum, which is flagella, and it helps in the movement of the bacteria. Additionally, they can have these hair-like structure that can call as fimbriae or pili or adhesins. And these hair-like structures can help the bacteria to attach to host cells. What should be remembered is that many of these parts listed here are actually identified by host cells to alert the immune system of an impending bacterial infection. Now, while there are many different parts of a bacteria, I thought that I'd tell you a little bit of the cell wall, because bacteria are protected from the environment because of their cell wall. Now, when we look at the cell wall of the bacteria, based on the composition, bacteria can be divided into two main types, which are gram-positive and gram-negative. Whether a bacteria is gram-positive or gram-negative depends on the staining pattern that they show. So after this gram staining is performed, the purple-colored bacteria are the gram-positive bacteria, while the pink-colored bacteria that are to the right are the ones that are gram-negative. Now, the cell walls of gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria are different, and that is what results in the different staining patterns. It is important to know the differences between the cell walls of these two types of bacteria. In the figure, we are actually seeing the cell wall of a gram-positive organism, where we can see these yellow and orange capsule-like structures that are joined together, which is the peptidoglycan. Here is an example of the cell wall of a gram-negative organism that's shown to the right. And when we compare the two figures side by side, they do look quite different. So please do know the differences between the gram-positive organism and the gram-negative organism cell wall. Another type of organism that can cause diseases are the ones that belong to the fungus or the fungi kingdom. Now, fungi are eukaryotic cells, and some types of fungi are actually present in our body, but many of them are found in the environment. Fungi can be unicellular or multicellular. So here in the picture, we can see the unicellular yeasts. And here, the next picture, we can see some multicellular but microscopic fungi. You can see a lot of these types of fungi as mold. So when their bread has mold on it and you look at it under the microscope, basically this is what you're seeing. We do have mushrooms that are also fungi, which are a lot larger. And mushrooms normally don't cause infections, but they do belong to the fungus family. Now, like bacteria, some fungi are used in making food products and hence are not pathogenic. They mostly act as commensals in our body, which means they coexist in our body. However, once again, when circumstances are different, then they can cause infections, and that is why fungi are considered as opportunistic pathogens. Now, many a times the infections that are caused by fungi are termed as mycosis. Fungi are eukaryotes, and hence they show compartmentalization of their cells, which is another way of saying that they have membrane-bound organelles, like they have a nucleus, an endoplasmic reticulum. They also have Golgi, and thus we can see all these membrane-bound organelles in the cell. Fungi also have a cell wall, and so it is the exteriormost part of the organism. The cell wall is made up of different components. The first one we're going to look at are the mannans. Mannans are also called as manoproteins, and they're basically proteins that have predominantly the mannose sugar associated with them. Mannans can function as antigenic determinants, which basically means that our immune system is able to recognize these manoproteins and mount immune responses against it. Glucans, on the other hand, are polymers of glucose that are present in the cell wall. Another component, which is a very important component, is chitin. Chitin is a polymer of N-acetylglucosamine. We can see chitin in fungi, but we have also seen chitin as part of the exoskeleton of these different crustaceans like crabs and lobsters. So this is the same chitin. Chitin, because of the way its structure is, forms a very inert, rigid, and water-insoluble structure. So it forms a very protective part of the cell wall. We are now going to look at protozoa and helminths. Now, protozoa, helminths, and parasitic lice are considered to be eukaryotic parasites. Protozoa belong to a family of protists, and they're normally unicellular. Helminths, on the other hand, are worms, and hence they are multicellular. Parasitic lice are insects, which makes them multicellular too. Parasitic lice usually grow on our body. They don't go in the body. And hence, unlike protozoa and helminths, they tend to be extracellular. We're not going to look into parasitic lice as much because since they're not in the body, we don't have much of an immune response against them. Protozoans are unicellular organisms that don't have a cell wall. However, they are eukaryotic, and hence their cell wall does show the presence of organelles. They are heterotrophs that are facultative anaerobes, which basically implies that they depend on others for food and they don't need a lot of oxygen for survival. They do come in a range of sizes from 2 to 100 micrometer, and the way they're able to obtain their food is through the process of phagocytosis, which is engulfing solid material, or pinocytosis, which is the uptake of liquid by a cell. Many protozoans can be observed in two different stages. The first one is the trophozoid. In the trophozoid stage, the organism is very active and it is growing and reproducing. The other stage is the cyst. In the cyst stage, the protozoan is dormant and it is able to have a protective covering around it that protects it from the environmental challenges. Helminths are parasitic worms, and so they're multicellular. And when we look at their bodies, they tend to have long, elongated bodies. They could also have cylindrical or flat bodies. They come in a variety of lengths and can cause infections that affect billions of people. For example, 1/6 of the human population suffers from an infection called escheriasis that is caused by the nematode worm Ascaris. More than 1 billion people are affected with another type of helminth called as whipworm. Hookworm, which is another helminth, infects over 500 million people. So thus we can see that helminths can cause a lot of misery. With this, we come to the end of our talk where we learned about different types of pathogens that include viruses, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and helminths.